Hi guys, what's going on, and welcome back to another video on New World. So with Open Beta actually launching today, I thought we'd go and take a look at the full patch notes for the Open Beta because there's some really interesting stuff changing, a lot of balance changes and updates, some PvP stuff, a lot of weapon balancing, and yeah, some really interesting changes that are well worth kind of diving into. So we've got the patch notes open and I just kind of want to walk through it. I'll try and break this video down into a few timestamps, so if there's something you specifically want to look at, if you want to go and look at weapon balancing, then you should hopefully be able to find the timestamp on the bottom of the video. So it kicks things off with expeditions. First, it just talks about a few of the more general bugs. Encountered a few of these in beta, particularly with boss encounters failing to begin. Really frustrating one when you get through all the way through the expedition and then you get to the end and then the boss doesn't spawn properly or just ends up standing there and you can't damage it. So glad they're dealing with some of the stuff like that. Seems to be some good changes. Things like the laser walls also had some problems with some of them. So yeah, just general bug fixes. Good start, good things to be doing. Then we move on to things, some of these made me laugh. Smooth the access points to ship flags on the starter beaches. It's like one of the most common questions we had when we started the beta in my guild. Everyone asked, where are the flags? I can't find the flags. How do I get to the flags? So little stuff like this, small changes. I guess it's a step in the right direction. Now this is a big one. Fixed multiple quests across the world that were causing bottlenecks due to large amounts of players attempting the same objective. So that's things like skinning a boar, where you've got 30 players trying to hunt 3 boars. Just causes a bottleneck, causes frustration for everyone. And this is actually a problem that happens in so many MMOs. I did the whole Arcade Unchained thing when that re-released, and that was also a nightmare where there was 100 people queuing to get one candle. So yeah, fixing bottlenecks like that is a really good thing. Really glad they've seen that as an issue and actually addressed it because it's very, very frustrating. Other than that, they've just going through just various little fixes, bug fixes, fix various town mission exploits, yes, all stuff like that. And then we move down to AI adjustments. And now this is mostly making enemies stronger and more tough to deal with. So increased damage scaling for AI above level 50. So that's going to mean 25% at level 66. That's quite a significant buff. End game PvE content is going to be significantly harder. I mean, some of it can be pretty challenging. It's certainly going to be group stuff only probably from now on. And we see the same health scaling as well from level 30 up to 66. So going to be doing more damage and have increased health. Move on to open world non-boss elites. Increased health and damage to bring them more in line with expedition difficulty enemies. Fine. Increased damage of all non-boss open world elite by AI to 12 to 17%. And then increased health of elite AI, so corrupted bears, corrupted ogres, other stuff like that, by 60%. That is huge. That is going to have a real big impact on elite zone farming. It's going to make it a lot more difficult. Is it going to be a viable leveling method anymore? Potentially not. I think 60% increase to health is significant. Increased damage as well of the elite AI. I mean, obviously it's group activity stuff anyway. But yeah, I think that's going to make it quite a lot harder. I'm kind of surprised with that one. I didn't feel like there was that large scale elite boss grinding and farming in the game during the beta. So it seems kind of a strange one to target and by such a large amount. But interesting to see how that plays out though. Open world and arena bosses. So arena bosses, I guess that's things like the Spriggan. Increased health, increased damage, bringing them more in line with expedition difficulties. Same as before, just flat out increase damage. And it's the same for expeditions. Increased damage for all expedition AI by 13%. Fairly significant. I mean, it's not going to make expeditions preventatively difficult, but it does make them harder. Then we go down, notable bug fixes. Okay, so that's just basically people exploiting some of the stuff. We have a specific Spriggan comment. I actually didn't test the Spriggan during the beta, only in some of the earlier alpha tests. Now uses heal behavior more consistently. Yeah, it was a bit crap, the Spriggan. It just didn't really seem to do a great deal. They're basically just fixing or sort of bug fixing, sort of improving the AI behavior of the Spriggan in some of those arena fights, which is good. What have we got? The depth fixed an issue that caused the Archdeacon's mines. Okay, yeah, so they're just sort of bug fixes for a lot of the expedition stuff. Yeah, okay, it's just basically a range of bug fixes for the expeditions, which is good, and then that leads us on to combat. PvP scaling. It's going to be kind of a controversial one, in my opinion. Fundamentally, I like the idea of PvP scaling. It got quite a lot of criticism during the beta, I think predominantly, unfortunately, by streamers, and I feel like slightly, and this is perhaps a bit harsh and certainly doesn't cover all streamers, but there was definitely a sort of a selection that didn't like PvP scaling because it meant they couldn't, as a higher level character, kind of stomp on some of the low level players, which is kind of looks good on stream, I guess. So I think that's probably where they were coming from, but that doesn't necessarily reflect the experience of the whole player base. Equally, on the flip side, you don't want people just creating level 15 hatchet builds and then going out and sort of spam killing level 60s. So there has to be kind of a balance there between the two. I don't think the balance was too far away. It's hard because we haven't got any specific metrics, but essentially the level difference is going to be mattering more. So the level 60 should now have an easier time killing the level 30, essentially. We're going to have to see how that pans out. I really want to get stuck into some PvP during this open beta test, so we kind of see what that level difference effect has. I'm sort of 50-50 on that one. I'd be interested. What do you guys think about that one? Did you like the PvP scaling, or did you think it was kind of a bad idea and you're pleased that it's being reduced? That's actually one I'm really curious about, because for me, I kind of liked it. So we've reduced some of the stat effects from the attribute bonuses. That's your, when you're putting your attribute points into Constitution, so the 50, 100, 150, so on. But this is for the 250 point attribute threshold. And then we move on to some of the weapon changes. So Warhammer. Reduced Warhammer hardened steel damage reduction bonus 20 to 15%. Small nerf, not going to have probably any real significant impact. We move on to sword. Free Injustice passive will now only move single debuff, not all debuffs. Leaping strike startup frames reduced from 12 to 14. Increased distance, so that's actually a slight buff. Counterattack has been modified to be able to stack and obtain better bonuses. 3% in power for 5 seconds when blocking. Okay, so sword is generally getting a small buff. That seems to be a good thing. I think it probably needs. It's a step in the right direction. Lifestaff. Sacred Protection passive changed to grant 5% increased healing efficiency to all group members. Okay, it's giving additional max HP, fine, but reducing effectiveness of Orb of Protection from 15 to 10%. Okay, that's interesting. Actually, as we get further on down the patch notes, because I did have a read through these before I started the video, I know there's some further nerfs coming to the Lifestaff gems and stuff like that, as well as a few other nerfs along the way. So when we get further down, we'll kind of have a look at that. But don't get confused, Lifestaff is actually getting nerfed. Now, Hatchet. This is one that directly is going to affect me, because I was probably going to go Musket and Hatchet. But if you watched my previous video talking about the open beta, I was also considering Rapier. And considering Rapier is now remaining unchanged and Hatchet is getting a nerf, it's kind of pushing me a little bit more that way of a Musket Rapier build. So I certainly want to be checking that out during the beta. But essentially, they are reducing the duration of Berserk and increasing the cooldown. And they are basically putting a small nerf to the amount of healing it's going to be doing while Berserk is active. It's probably a good thing. Hatchet had a lot of sustain. That Berserk did actually make a real significant difference in both PvP and PvE, which is why I used it, because it made it such a viable build. Hatchet's always been one they've struggled to balance. Right since back in the alpha, Hatchet was kind of the go-to OP weapon. And even though it's had a series of nerfs over time, it has still remained an intensely powerful weapon. And so I don't think this is a bad thing. I mean, much as it's kind of a shame because it's the one I wanted to use, realistically for the balance of the game, I think it's a good thing. Also, a few nerfs coming to Great Axe, effectiveness of Gravity Well, so you're not getting quite such a defense buff now when you use it, but only 5%. Reduced Great Axe enduring strike damage from 20 to 15 again, and the second hit of Reap no longer has stagger on it. So a few little nerfs coming to Great Axe. It was quite a powerful weapon. It's certainly not on the level of Hatchet, I don't think, but yeah, I think it's probably a reasonable small scale nerf to kind of bring it a little bit more in line. Reduced effectiveness of Unbreakable Focus passive from 20 to 10%. Just a 10% buff, nothing else attached. Chain perks, so this is for some of the magic weapons. I think they were kind of being used for a lot in war, just to sort of almost continually trigger these chain effects. It was kind of a little bit silly. Now it's only going to trigger off basic and light attacks. Probably a good change. Realistically, I think it's a good thing. Yeah, this is now the big difference to healer that I was thinking of. I couldn't quite remember it when we were talking about Lifestaff earlier on in the video. Equipment load changes. Now this is going to have a really big impact. So currently, in the current build, in the last build we played, light armor got a 20% damage buff, medium armor got a 10% damage buff, and heavy armor got 0 damage buff. Now it's also changing to include healing as well as the damage. So healing has been reduced by 20% across the board, flat debuff, 20% debuff. But if you're wearing light armor, you're now going to get a 20% buff to healing. So i.e. you go back to the 100%. 10% buff on medium, 0% buff on heavy. This is because essentially a lot of healers were going heavy armor. Kind of, Sir Medieval is actually a really good example of this. His paladin build was based around a heavy armor healing class, right? So they're basically nerfing that so to try and encourage healers to be in light armor. I don't think this is a bad thing. Healers were definitely one of the strongest class in the game. They could self-heal almost indefinitely. So a nerf to their healing output is definitely a good thing. And encouraging them back into light armor, I think, is a good thing as well. If you're a heavy armor healer, you might feel a bit put out by this. I think light armor healer is actually still a very viable class. If you're newer to the game, it's going to seem harder at first because getting those dodge rolls to work for you, particularly in a larger scale fight, is challenging. Certainly not something I've managed to pin down particularly well yet. But once you get the hang of it, if you talk to some of the real experienced alpha players who've got thousands of hours in the game, light armor dodge rolls can be very, very effective, and you can really mitigate a lot of the damage that you'd otherwise take by evasion. So I don't think you're going to lose out too much by this. We then go on to a flat weight limit decrease. So currently, or again in the previous build, you could wear light armor but put on a heavy armor helmet and still be in the light armor category. And it basically meant that you could kind of exploit it a little bit, keep the dodge roll, but increase your physical or magic protection quite a lot more. And they're basically changing that. So the medium equip threshold is going from 15 to 13, and the heavy threshold from 30 to 23. So it's effectively limiting your ability to stick on heavier armor, but keep in a lower encumbrance class. Definitely a good change. It was kind of almost an exploit how people were kind of using it, myself included. Definitely a step in the right direction, I think. Normalize the weight of protection ratios within each armor class. Wow, that's distinctly unclear, isn't it? Don't know. Not a clue what that means. Any suggestions in the comments? Increase the armor provided by chest piece and reduce the amount provided by helmets. That kind of cuts back up to the comment I made above. People were wearing light armor and then putting a heavy armor helmet on because helmets provided a very large amount of physical protection. So kind of just an exploit. To some extent, I feel this above comment almost renders this mute a little bit because of the threshold weight reductions, but still makes sense. Chest piece should probably be the piece that's giving you the bulk of the armor protection. Everything else is just protecting your extremities, isn't it? Your arms, your legs, your head. Well, I suppose your head is important, but realistically, the chest is your main area. Slightly increase the armor granted by balanced ratios to match the total armor provided by physical and elemental ratios. Bit of a tongue twister. And reduce the weight of round and kite shields. Well, that's fair enough. Shields used to add quite a lot of encumbrance to you. I think if you're just a sword and shield user, you're kind of a fairly disadvantaged by that, so I'm glad they're kind of reducing that. Then that leads us on to potions, housing trophies, and kind of buffs and debuff stuff. And all of this is basically a nerf. So, housing trophies, not something I got stuck into very much during the beta, but in a sense, these are things that you can put in your house, and they give you a flat damage bonus against certain creature types, i.e. Ancients or Angry Earth. And you could get up to a 10% bonus there, which was probably quite a lot. They flat out halved it from 6 to 3, 8 to 4, 10 to 5. So the maximum bonus you can get now is 5%. Quite a small bonus, I suppose. Still, every little helps, and it's going to be something you can stick in your house. It doesn't cost you anything once you've got it in there, so still worthwhile doing. We then go on to potions. I think they've kind of overdone this nerf a little bit, possibly. So, things like elemental damage consumables. So they used to last 3 minutes and give a 25% reduction to the incoming damage of elemental. But they've effectively reduced that down to 30% and to 30 seconds, and only a 15% damage reduction. Kind of brings into question its overall worth when you're down to that fairly sort of short period, I suspect. But it'd be kind of interesting to see how that plays out. Same with so when it says creature family, it means ancients, Angry Earth, the undead, all that sort of stuff. The Lost. So it used to be a 5-minute duration, down to only 20 seconds you're going to be getting from these consumables, these potions now. Updated the amount of hits players can take when using creature family has been nerfed, and the overall effect of the consumable is down a lot as well. The only benefit, the good thing I think, is that all consumables now have a unified cooldown time, which kind of makes a lot more sense. Yeah, fairly big nerf there. I think that's going to really limit the effectiveness of any of these consumables. Again, same, more consumable nerfs, effectively just reducing the overall effectiveness. Then we go on to War Siege Turrets. Kind of surprising on this one. Explosive cannon damage was already really quite high, in my opinion. So they basically increased that. They've also increased the distance before repeater damage starts to drop off and increased the overall siege weapon damage by 20%. The only thing to sort of balance that against is siege weapon damage is now going to be mitigated by armor. So if you're in a heavy armor class, you're going to be more affected by this. I guess, again, this all goes back to some extent, a slight more nerf to Lifestaff, because they're going to be more vulnerable to siege weapons because their armor mitigation is going to be lower. It's also probably going to affect me because I'm probably going to be a light armor musket. So yeah, this is not necessarily going to be so good for me. Kind of surprised they've done quite such increased damage increases to some of the siege weapons. Be interesting to see how that's going to play out. I suppose this is going to make it easier for the attackers outside, but then the defenders once you actually get up to the fort. Lifestyle buff, reduce the effectiveness of Arcane Blessing lifestyle buff, and the absorption from 20 to 5%. We're moving down. Healing potions is kind of an interesting one. Increase the base damage increase, so your flat health gain is going to be up, but the percentage gain based on your total health is going down. And same for regeneration potions. Probably makes sense. Gives you a larger flat buff. Yeah, you can see that. Not necessarily super required, but probably a positive change. I was trying to work this one out when they say endurance potions. Do they mean encumbrance potions, i.e. the ability to increase the amount of weight you're carrying in-game? Or do they mean stamina? I don't know. Be interesting to see, but whatever they mean by endurance potions, that have been removed entirely from the game, and they're actually removed in the crafting section later on down in these patch notes as well. Then we move on to more of an attack on the Lifestaff. If you're a Lifestaff user, you're going to be slumped pretty deeply in your chair by now and not very happy with how things are going, but it's only going to get worse. So if you're using a Lifestaff, you're going to go full focus. That's how you have to play the class, or that's how you would normally play the class if you want to go for the best sort of healer build. But to mitigate that, on your second weapon, you almost always stick in an amber gem, and this basically turns some of its damage and makes use of your focus. Turn it into a different damage type. So that means that you can have a really good life staff and actually a decently strong secondary weapon. Sometimes that might be sword and shield, sometimes that might be a great axe, and you're still getting a real chunky great axe because it's still really effective. And they're effectively nerfing the amber gem so that your secondary weapon is going to be a little bit less powerful. They even put in the patch notes it's specifically to make healers' secondary weapons less powerful in terms of raw damage. So it's a nerf to focus build healers. I think it makes sense. Again, we're going to kind of have to see how this plays out now in this build, but healers in the beta build were some of the strongest classes, so they're kind of being directly targeted down. Not necessarily through direct nerfs, but through some of their ancillaries, you know, kind of like by forcing them into light armor, now by doing the amber gem as well. It's all kind of a resulting nerf. Some of the war stuff, this is a nice one. If you've ever played in any of the wars during the beta, basically is what everyone did was as soon as you spawned in, everyone brought the inferno traps, because that's basically what you had to do, and you'd create these great sort of epic minefields stretching around the outside of the fortress, and it made it very hard for anyone to get in, because as soon as you started to make a push, you run into these giant minefields, and you know, every second person gets blown to oblivion. They're basically putting a deployable limit of 15 per team, so you can't deploy more of them than that now. You're going to be kind of limited to where you can deploy them. So I guess there's going to need to also be a little bit more coordination there, because players are going to be required to, well, your team needs to know to put them in the right spot, effectively. We then move on to notable bug fixes. Wow, this is a long selection of patch notes. Sorry, this has turned into quite such a long video. Let's try and speed through some of these. I had a quick glance through these earlier, and there was nothing specific. It's mostly just bug fixes. I didn't see anything that was like a specific sort of shadow nerf that you might not read in here specifically. But it's mostly just applying things, you know, fix the camera snapping during fishing. That definitely happened to me. Things like that. It's just small little changes and buffs and how to things how they should have been working rather than actual buffs or debuffs. Economy, progression, and rewards. So they've basically added tier 4 and tier 5 Azoth staffs, or Azoth, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I always get told off for my pronunciation of beta, even though that's the correct way of saying it. So they basically added tier 4 and tier 5 Azoth staffs. So you're going to be needing them for level 50 and 60 and 65 corruption breaches, which you're going to be needing for endgame content. So ultimately, you're going to be needing to do these 2 unlocks. Town projects have got a nerf. Thank goodness for that. They needed it. I like town projects as much as anyone else, but it shouldn't be your primary method of leveling. It should be a side project, right? You should be able to, you know, you got a bit of spare raw material. You can kill some wolves on your way to your next quest, or maybe on the way to the next quest, there's a stop-off point you can go to just to kill a few withered or something for a town project. Great. As a side method of leveling, doesn't want to be the primary method of leveling. And so we've got some pretty hefty reductions, like the crafting and provisions turning are getting halved. Refined and raw materials are getting reduced as well. Looks like no changes though for things like killing wolves, so I guess they're going to stay the same. So you're still going to be wanting to pick them up as a level of method of leveling, but I suppose you can't now just sit in town and have your guild feed you raw materials and just auto level that way. They've also reduced the amount of XP required at lower levels. So it doesn't specify what it means by lower levels, but I guess that's 1 to 20 and then 20 to 30. It's both had the XP requirements reduced slightly, but then it seems from level 30 onwards, it's going to be the same. So you're going to be able to get to the mid-game a little bit easier. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It takes quite a while to even get to the Amarine excavation previously, so I think for players who only have a few hours or an hour or two a day to put into the game, you know, a lot of people have very busy real lives, I think that's probably a good thing. That was the mysterious endurance potions have been removed from the crafting section of the game as well. Drop rate of named items from expedition bosses have been increased. That's a good thing. No problems with that. And then we've normalized perks on faction weapons and armor. Yes, different factions had different perks to them, and it was intensely confusing, and some factions got better benefits than others, so it makes sense just to normalize that across the board. And you're no longer going to start with gems pre-equipped, you're just going to get an empty gem slot. Again, that's better because you can then put on the gem that you want to have. Although we've got a slight reduction in the total gear score of some of this faction equipment. Is that a good thing or not? I suppose it means it forces you to go out into some of the high level zones to actually get some better tier equipment, which I guess is a good thing. But 550 wasn't necessarily end game equipment anyway, so you kind of have to weigh that up. And if you take it too low, then it kind of loses overall point of doing any of the faction missions to kind of get any of this stuff if it becomes too low. So I guess that's got to be balanced up. A few equipment visual changes, and then a long list of bugs down at the bottom, which I'll probably leave for you to read through because I'll post a link to these patch notes because they're currently not yet visible. So if you want to go and have a look at them, you can go and have a look. But it was mostly just fixing bug fixes and some other changes. So it's a fairly hefty selection of changes for open beta. No real surprises. I think some people had it in their minds that they were going to come to open beta and there was going to be a huge range of new content, and I didn't think that seemed very likely in the time that they, had available. I think that wasn't really what they were looking to achieve, and I think they were mostly working on balance changes, bug fixes, and I think that's what we've seen. I think there's been some nice balance changes, particularly some of the Lifestaff Nerfs, a little bit of some weapon balancing going on, hatchet changes and stuff like that, which I think is a good thing. Some balances for wars. Hopefully just a lot of other little changes. Things like some of those bottlenecking quests were going to be a problem at launch, and it's nice that things like that have been addressed. And there's things like that which I think they've done really well on. That's the sort of thing they should be putting time into. We don't need new content for launch. We need a smooth launch, and that seems to be what they're working towards too. So I think that's a good thing. Anyway, this video was far too long. I can't believe I've been talking for 26 minutes, so if anyone has made it this far, then, well, hero. Do actually put in the comments. I don't actually watch this whole thing, or have I just talked to myself for no reason? Probably. Anyway, we'll end the video here. Thank you for watching, guys. Lots more New World content on the way, so do subscribe, and I shall see you guys all on the next one.